He skipped my hospital bed for his wife's birthday, so I sold the house overnight. I had one person to call. One. And when I lay there in that hospital bed between life and death, he was busy popping champagne for his wife's birthday. That was the moment I knew. My own son had already left me behind. The smell of antiseptic lingered in the air, sharper than the IV needle taped to the back of her hand. Helen squinted against the sunbeam, piercing through the half-closed blinds, turning the sterile white room into a cruel stage. Memorial Day. It was supposed to be a day for family barbecues, laughter, and the sound of children running through sprinklers. But for Helen Carter, 67 years old, it was a day of silence, of beeping monitors, and the echoing emptiness of a hospital ward. The nurse, Julia, moved around efficiently, her face obscured by the sunlight slashing across her features. Helen tried to sit up, but the pain in her abdomen shot like firecrackers through her side. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Can you pass me the phone?" Julia glanced over, gentle concern in her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart. Do you want me to dial someone for you?" Helen hesitated. She had no long list of friends, no siblings alive, no one left who'd drop everything for her. There was only one name that mattered. "My son," she said, "Derek Carter, in San Mateo." Julia handed over the hospital phone and gave her a reassuring nod before stepping out. With trembling fingers, Helen dialed the number she knew by heart. It rang twice, then again. She closed her eyes, willing him to pick up. She needed to hear his voice, just hear that he cared, that he'd come, that she wasn't invisible. Finally, a click. "Hey, you reached Derek and Lindsay's birthday bash hotline." A cheerful male voice boomed. Laughter erupted in the background. Glasses clinked. Music thumped. "We're kinda busy celebrating this amazing woman right now, but leave a message if you must." Then the call dropped. Helen's heart dropped with it. She stared at the phone, her breath shallow, her body already exhausted from the emergency gallbladder surgery the night before. But the pain in her chest had nothing to do with incisions or medication. It was a different kind of wound, older, deeper. Just then, the phone buzzed again. Derek was calling back. She answered, relief rushing in like a tide. "Derek, Mom." "Hey, sorry. It's kind of loud here," he shouted over the music. "Everything okay? I'm in the hospital," she said barely above a whisper. "They had to operate. I didn't want to scare you, but I thought you'd want to know." Silence. A beat. Then came a strained chuckle. "Geez, Mom, you should have texted or something." "Is it serious?" "It was," she said. "It still is. They had to take my gallbladder out. Emergency surgery. I'm still recovering." He didn't answer right away. Then, "Okay, but you're gonna be all right, right?" "I think so. But Derek, I'm alone here." Another pause. She could hear someone in the background yell. Speech time, followed by Lindsay's unmistakable giggle. "Mom, Look, today's Lindsay's birthday, okay? I can't just leave. I mean, we planned this for weeks." Helen didn't respond. "Are you gonna be okay?" he asked again, voice stiff with impatience now. "I don't know," she said, "but I guess it doesn't matter." Click. He hung up. The silence that followed felt heavier than the hospital bed pressing into her spine. Helen set the phone down, her hands no longer shaking. They were still. Numb. And as the sunlight slid across the sheets like a spotlight, she realized something unbearable. She had always been the dependable one, the forgiving one, the mother who stayed silent when she should have spoken, who gave more than she ever received. And now she wasn't even worth an Uber ride and a slice of cake delay. Tears welled up hot and blinding. But they didn't fall. Not this time. Instead, she stared out the window watching as the world outside celebrated life, freedom, family. All while she lay inside, discarded like old furniture, useful once, now just in the way. In that moment, something inside Helen broke, and something else hardened. The hospital room returned to stillness after Derek hung up, but inside Helen something seethed. She stared at the phone, as if willing it to ring again, to buzz, to say, "I'm coming, Mom. I'm sorry. I'll be there soon." But there was nothing. No missed calls, no texts, not even a "hope you feel better." She lay back slowly, her head sinking into the pillow. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, but the quiet felt deafening. Her mind screamed into the void that her son had left behind. She wasn't asking for the world. Just a visit, just a moment, just not to be forgotten. The memory of his voice, so casual, so distracted, echoed in her ears, that forced tone like he was checking a box, like she was an interruption rather than a concern. "Are you gonna be okay?" It wasn't the question that cut. It was what it revealed, that Derek had already decided she'd be fine, that he didn't want the truth. He wanted her to say yes, and let him off the hook. For Helen, it was the final proof of a slow, silent erosion. She had seen it coming. Little things, fewer calls, less eye contact during visits, the way Lindsay always seemed to find an excuse to leave early, dragging Derek with her. Holidays replaced by vague promises. 1,000 little cuts that added up to this moment of absolute clarity. She wasn't a priority, not anymore. Maybe she hadn't been for years. She turned her head toward the window again. The sun had shifted. The rays that once pierced the room like golden knives had dimmed into a warm orange glow, casting long shadows on the floor. Time passed differently in hospitals. Every hour stretched like a rubber band, and every second alone felt like a verdict. She pressed the nurse button, and Julia came in moments later. "Everything okay?" Julia asked. Helen nodded slowly. "Could you close the blinds for me?" Julia did so with quiet efficiency. Pain level manageable, Helen said, but she wasn't talking about the stitches. Julia adjusted her IV, then paused. "Anyone coming to visit tonight?" Helen opened her mouth, then closed it. "No," she said finally. "Not tonight." Julia offered a warm smile. "Would you like me to sit with you for a bit?" Helen blinked. That simple kindness made her chest tighten more than anything else had. "I'd like that," she whispered. So they sat. Julia in the vinyl chair, Helen lying still, the soft hum of machines filling the space between them. No questions, no pity, just presence. It was more than her own son had given her. When Julia eventually had to leave, Helen thanked her with a weak smile. The door clicked shut behind her, and Helen reached for the drawer beside her bed. Inside was her wallet, a lipstick she hadn't used in months, and an old photo she always kept close. It was from Derek's high school graduation. He was 18, full of energy, hope life. Helen stood beside him in a blue floral dress, arm around his shoulder. Gerald, her late husband, had taken the picture. She remembered how proud they had been. Derek had been so full of dreams back then, so connected to them, to her. She ran her thumb along the edge of the photo. What happened? She'd raised him to care, to be decent, to value family. But somewhere along the way, her voice must have grown faint, replaced by louder ones, Lindsay's probably telling him what mattered more. Social status, appearances, plans. And now she was just a fading obligation in the background of his real life. Her heart ached not just for herself, but for the boy in the photo, The boy who once called her his best friend. How had they come to this? The room darkened as evening fell. A nurse came in to check her vitals, then dimmed the lights. Still no messages. No call. Not even from Lindsay. Not even out of politeness. That night, sleep came in waves. Shallow. Restless. And every time she drifted off, she was pulled back by the sound of laughter. Derek's laugh in her memory cruelly overlapping with her own silent gasps for connection. By dawn, something in her had changed. The woman who woke up wasn't quite the same Helen who had cried quietly into her pillow hours before. She felt stripped down, raw, but also clear. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't chase. If Derek wanted a life without her in it, she would grant him that wish, but not in the way he expected. A week later, the hospital discharged Helen. The nurse wheeled her to the curb, while Helen clutched a small bag of belongings on her lap slippers, an oversized cardigan, a book she didn't open once. There were no balloons, no smiling faces, no waiting car with a son at the wheel. Just a yellow cab, she'd called herself. As the taxi pulled out of the hospital's circular driveway, Helen watched families with flowers and signs greet their loved ones. Her chest tightened, but not with envy. No, not anymore. She was past wishing. Now she observed, she recorded. She remembered. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Every red light reminded her of years spent rushing Derek to school, his backpack bouncing on the seat beside her, his voice babbling about science fairs and summer camps. Back then she'd filled the silence with songs and stories. Now silence was all she had. When the cab finally turned onto her street, Helen felt a strange sensation roll over her familiarity, tinged with a new kind of detachment. The house stood where it always had, modest and dignified, with peeling white trim, and an oak tree out front that had been there since Derek was born. She stepped out slowly. The driver offered to help, but she waved him off politely. Her cane clicked against the pavement as she approached the front door. She had hoped foolishly that maybe someone would be waiting. A neighbor, a note, even a single welcome home flower. But there was nothing. Just the groan of the door as it opened and the cool breath of a house long untouched. She entered, and the quiet hit her like a wave. Not peaceful quiet, hollow quiet. The kind that presses against your chest like a weighted blanket you can't throw off. Every step echoed. The hardwood floors creaked under her feet, like they were mourning. Helen looked around. Everything was as she had left it, but it all felt off. The photos on the wall seemed to belong to someone else's life. The curtains looked too bright, the couch too large. For the first time, she realized this house didn't feel like home anymore. Not without Gerald. Not with Derek absent. Not with every room whispering memories that only she could hear. She made her way to the kitchen, her joints aching from the surgery. The scent of lavender still clung faintly to the curtains. Gerald had always insisted on fresh lavender oil in the spring. She opened the fridge. Empty. No welcome meal. No soup waiting in a pot. Just a blinking light and stale air. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Derek had done his homework, and where she and Gerald had shared morning coffee for 38 years. Her fingers brushed the worn wood surface. Then something caught her eye. An envelope wedged behind the old sugar canister, yellowed, slightly curled, and unmistakably aged. Her breath caught. She pulled it free. The handwriting on the front was shaky but familiar Gerald's. Her heart stuttered. She opened it. Dear Helen, it began. If you're reading this, I'm probably long gone and knowing you. You're trying to carry everything on your own again. But don't. Promise me something. Don't let anyone push you out of this home unless you choose it. This house is yours. Our life is here. Make sure it stays that way on your terms. Love, always, G." Tears welled up, but these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of clarity. She read the letter again slower this time, as if the words were building a shield around her. Gerald knew her better than anyone. He had seen this coming, and suddenly it all made sense. This house wasn't just wood and plaster. It was hers, her history, her resilience, her right. And no one was going to make her feel small or inconvenient in it again. She stood steadier than before and walked through the rooms. Every wall had a story. Every creak in the floorboard was familiar. She touched the banister, the edge of the dining table, the old quilt draped over the armchair. This place had cradled her joys, her sorrows, her entire identity. But now it was just a shell. Gerald's letter gave her permission, not to stay, but to decide, to reclaim her narrative. And for the first time in a long time, Helen wasn't afraid of change. She climbed the stairs slowly, carefully, her cane thudding rhythmically. At the top, she entered the master bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed she'd shared with Gerald for decades. She reached into the nightstand and pulled out a worn notebook, her personal journal. She flipped to a blank page and began to write. "I came home to silence, but I didn't come back to stay. Gerald, I think it's time to let go." It happened on a rainy Tuesday. Helen was folding laundry in the living room, the sound of the old dryer humming like background static to her thoughts. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, steady, rhythmic, and oddly soothing. She didn't hear Emily come in until the girl was already in the doorway, dripping slightly from the drizzle her backpack clutched tightly. Grandma Helen looked up surprised, but warmed by the sight. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at your mom's?" Emily bit her lip. Her eyes darted around, unsure. "Can I come in for a bit?" "Of course." Helen set the laundry aside, patting the couch beside her. Emily sat pulling off her wet hoodie and revealing her pink headphones hanging around her neck. She seemed fidgety, unusual, for her calm, observant demeanor. Helen tilted her head. "Is something wrong?" There was a pause. Then Emily reached into her backpack and pulled out a small flash drive. "I wasn't sure if I should show you this," she said, her voice low. "But I found it in Dad's office drawer last weekend, when I was looking for my math notebook." Helen took the USB carefully. "What is it?" a recording Emily whispered. "A conversation between Dad and Mom. I didn't mean to snoop, but..." I listened. "And Grandma..." Then she stopped, swallowing hard. "You should just hear it." Helen nodded slowly. Her hands were steady, but her pulse began to race. She walked to her laptop and plugged in the drive. After a moment, a single audio file appeared. She clicked play. At first, just static. Then Derek's voice. Clear. Familiar. "So once the deed's in my name, we can list it within the week. The market's strong. Hazel's corner alone would pay top dollar." Lindsay chimed in, her tone sharp, calculated. "She'll never go for it if you ask directly. You have to make her feel like she's the one letting go." "She's too tired to fight," Derek said. "After the surgery, she's weaker than ever. I'll just start bringing up how hard it is for her to manage alone. Guilt her into thinking the move is for Emily's sake." Lindsay scoffed. "It is for Emily's sake. That school near Redwood costs a fortune. You want her to get in, don't you?" There was a pause. than the sound of clinking glasses. To smart investments, Lindsay said. To finally putting that house to use, Derek replied. Helen stopped the recording. For a long time, she didn't move, didn't blink. The silence between her and Emily was deafening. The house suddenly felt colder, as if the betrayal had sucked the warmth from its very walls. Emily sat frozen, her hands clasped in her lap. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I didn't know they were planning that. I just thought, maybe you should know." Helen turned to look at her granddaughter. Really look. And what she saw wasn't just a child caught in adult games. It was a quiet ally, a kindred soul, the only person who hadn't tried to manipulate or discard her. She walked back and sat beside her. "You were right to bring this to me," she said, her voice even. "Thank you, sweetheart." Emily's shoulders sagged in relief. "What are you going to do?" Helen looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking. In the distance, a single beam of sunlight cut through the gray sky like a promise. "I'm going to stop pretending they'll come around," she said. "And I'm going to make sure they don't get a single thing they didn't earn." She squeezed Emily's hand. "You and we're going to write the next chapter." For the first time in days, Helen smiled, not with joy, but with purpose. She had evidence now, not just of betrayal, but of intent. Derek and Lindsay weren't just neglectful. They were predatory. And Helen Carter. She had been underestimated for the last time. The following morning, Helen dressed with more intention than she had in weeks. A dark navy blouse, soft slacks, her hair brushed back neatly. There was no makeup, no perfume, just a crisp resolve that clung to her like armor. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used since Gerald's funeral. "Alan Thompson, attorney at law," said the familiar voice. Alan Helen said, "It's Helen Carter. I need to see you. Today." There was a pause. Then warmth returned to his voice. "Helen, I'm so sorry we haven't spoken in a while. What's going on? I need to change my will and sell the house. And I need your help making sure the wrong people don't touch a single cent." Alan was silent for only a breath before saying, "I'll clear my afternoon." By noon, she was in his office. The smell of leather-bound books and fresh coffee greeted her like an old friend. Alan looked older, more silver in his hair since Gerald's passing, but his eyes were just as sharp. Helen handed over the flash drive first. "Before we start anything," she said, "you need to hear this." Alan plugged it in, put on headphones, and sat back in his chair. As he listened, Helen watched his jaw tighten, his brow furrow. By the time the recording ended, his voice was steel. "I've represented some pretty low clients," he said, "but I've never seen someone plot to gut their own mother like a business deal." Helen nodded. "I want to take everything away from them, but legally, quietly, cleanly." Alan leaned forward. "Then here's what we'll do." Over the next few hours, papers were drawn, deeds reviewed, accounts recalculated. Alan guided her through each step. The house would be listed immediately under her name, only with no co-signatory power. A private trust would be created irrevocable, untouchable by Derek or Lindsay. The sole beneficiary, Emily Carter. The trust would fund her education, health, living expenses, everything needed to ensure she'd never have to rely on people like her parents for support. "Are you sure about this?" Alan asked. "You're cutting them off completely." Helen's voice was steady. "They cut me off the moment I became inconvenient." She paused, then reached into her purse. "I also need you to include this," she said, placing Gerald's handwritten letter on the desk. "A copy goes into the trust folder." And this. She pulled out a second envelope freshly sealed. Goes to Derek. Unopened. With the house keys inside. Alan opened his drawer and handed her a small, locked wooden box. You'll want to keep the original documents in here. Consider it the final word. Helen took the box, feeling its weight, a symbol not of burden, but of finality. That evening, the house buzzed with unexpected energy. A real estate agent came for the appraisal. Movers boxed up what little she planned to keep. A friend from her church group arrived with soup gossip and shocked support. Emily came over after school, wide-eyed at the flurry of activity. "Are you really leaving?" she asked. Helen crouched beside her. "I'm not running away, sweetheart. I'm walking towards something better. And you're coming with me if you'd like." Emily looked stunned. "But what about my school? And Mom and Dad?" Helen smiled gently. "Your new school is already arranged. It's better. Closer to my new place. As for your parents, they made their choices." She handed Emily a letter. "You don't need to open this now. But it's from your grandpa, Gerald. He wanted you to have it one day. I think today is that day." Emily hugged her tightly. "I want to come with you." Helen held her back, tears pricking her eyes. "Then pack a bag, baby girl. We're starting over." Later that night, with the house nearly bare, and the keys resting in a plain envelope addressed to Derek Carter, Helen sat down at the kitchen table one last time. She pulled out a sheet of stationery and began to write, "Derek. This isn't a revenge letter. This is a resignation from the role of being your silent safety net. You made a choice not once, but many times to prioritize convenience over connection. You let a birthday party mean more than my life. You let ambition blind you to loyalty. Your father warned me once not to let anyone push me out of this house, unless it was my decision. Well, today, I choose. I'm choosing peace. I'm choosing Emily. I'm choosing me. There's nothing left here for you. Not the house, not the money, and no more of me waiting by the phone. I haven't died, Derek, but I'm done waiting for the son I once knew to come back. Helen." She folded the letter neatly and slipped it beside the house key. Then she picked up the wooden box and her overnight bag and left without looking back. The house that had once held her memories, her laughter, her sacrifices, now held only echoes. Let Derek and Lindsay walk into that emptiness and realize what they had truly lost. Helen had made her choice, and this time, it was for her. It didn't take long. By Friday evening, Derek and Lindsay were on the front porch of Helen's house, though it was no longer hers in the way they expected. Derek banged on the door, red in the face, fingers clenched around the envelope he'd received just hours earlier. Lindsay hovered behind him, trying to control her expression, but failing. Her lips pursed, her posture stiff, offended, not shocked. Helen opened the door calmly, Emily at her side. The house behind them was nearly empty, the light warm and quiet, the final boxes already moved. "I assume you got my letter," Helen said without ceremony. "You sold the house," Derek barked, voice rising. "You sold our house without telling us." Helen tilted her head. "It was never your house, Derek. You just thought it would be. That was your first mistake." "You can't just," Lindsay interjected, stepping forward, arms folded. Helen cut her off gently. "I did." Derek waved the envelope. "What is this? Some petty punishment, because I missed a hospital visit. You seriously want to throw away everything over that?" Helen's eyes didn't waver. "No, Derek. I threw it away because you did. Piece by piece. Year by year. This house wasn't yours to inherit. It was mine to protect." He scoffed. From your own family." Helen gestured to Emily beside her. "The only family here who didn't try to manipulate me for profit is standing right here." Emily looked between her parents and her grandmother, her eyes wide but clear. She reached out and took Helen's hand, fingers threading through the older woman's. Derek's expression twisted. "She's 12. You seriously think she understands all this? You're using her." Helen's voice dropped cold and controlled. "Don't you dare. She came to me. She gave me that recording. She knew what was right when you didn't." Lindsay stepped forward, attempting to soften. "Helen, come on. You're emotional. This doesn't have to be ugly. You're going through a hard time," and Helen raised a hand. "No, I went through a hard time. Alone. While you popped champagne. While you schemed to take what wasn't yours. And now I'm just doing what Gerald told me to do." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a worn piece of paper. His letter. He wrote this before he passed. Told me not to let anyone push me out of this house unless I chose it. And I did. I chose freedom. I chose to walk away, but not without setting the record straight. She looked Derek in the eye. "You made a choice too, and now you live with it." Derek looked stunned less by her words and more by the finality in her tone, as if for the first time he truly understood that she meant it, that there was no coming back from this. Lindsay Ever, the tactician, recovered quicker. "You think you're clever, but what happens when she gets older? You think she'll still love you when she realizes you cut her parents off." Emily's voice rang out louder than expected. "I already realized it, and I love her more for it." Lindsay's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Helen looked at her granddaughter, pride blooming in her chest. "This," she said softly, "is the only legacy I care about." She turned to Derek one last time. "You said once that I'd be okay. And you know what? You were right. But not because you helped. Because I helped myself." Derek's face was unreadable confusion, guilt-wounded pride swirling together in silence. He turned, muttering, "Let's go," and stormed down the steps. Lindsay followed without another word. As the car pulled away, Helen exhaled. Emily leaned her head against her shoulder. "That was intense." Helen chuckled. "Yes, it was. But it was necessary." They stood on the porch for a moment longer, watching the last of the twilight fade. Then Helen turned, opened the door, and led her granddaughter inside. Not into a battle-scarred house, but into the first peaceful evening of their new life. The apartment was small, cozy, tucked in a quiet corner of Hazel's Corner, a neighborhood full of retired teachers, artists, and longtime widows. It had none of the grandeur of the old house. No sprawling staircase, no vintage chandelier. Just sunlight, filtering through modest windows, the scent of rosemary and tea and quiet. Glorious, deliberate quiet. Helen stood in the kitchen her first morning there, barefoot on cool tile, watching the kettle whistle. A single mug sat on the counter, one with faded lettering that read, "World's Most Tired Mom." She smiled as the steam curled upwards, soft and fragrant. There was no one demanding her time, no one expecting anything, no ungrateful faces to cook for. Just Helen, the hum of peace, and the knowledge that everything around her now was chosen, not inherited, not expected. Chosen. She carried the tea to the small sunroom where Emily sat cross-legged on a beanbag, scribbling in a journal. "Homework?" Helen asked. Emily grinned. "Creative writing. I'm doing a story about a lady pirate who retires from the sea and starts a cupcake shop." Helen chuckled. Sounds deliciously rebellious. The girl's eyes sparkled. She has a parrot who keeps stealing muffins. Helen sipped her tea, watching Emily, as sunlight caught the highlights in her hair. This right here was everything she had fought for. Not revenge, not power, peace, a new legacy. Later that week, they went to register Emily at her new school. Helen filled out the paperwork slowly, carefully, making sure each box reflected truth, not just logistics. Guardian Helen Carter, emergency contact, Alan Thompson, relationship to student grandmother, legal guardian. Emily looked up from her desk. You wrote? Guardian Helen nodded. Because I am. A smile tugged at the girl's lips. Does that make me like your apprentice? In what sass sarcasm cookie tasting? Emily giggled. In life. Helen leaned forward, her eyes kind. Then let me show you how to build one you're proud of. Not one you're stuck in. They walked out hand in hand, the future wide open ahead of them. Back at the apartment, Helen found herself doing something unexpected, pulling out an old, full-length mirror from one of the storage boxes. It was Gerald's. He always insisted they keep it by the entryway, so Helen could check if she still looked like a queen before walking out. She stood in front of it now, older, yes. A few more wrinkles, a little more gray, but her eyes were sharp, awake, unapologetically alive. She whispered, "Hello, Helen. There you are. I've missed you." She didn't cry. She smiled, because in shedding everything she had clung to out of duty, she had finally found herself again. That weekend, they went to the farmer's market. Helen held Emily's tote, while the girl bounced between vendors marveling at handmade jewelry and wildflowers. They shared tamales on a park bench, and Helen let herself laugh with her whole chest for the first time in years. She no longer felt like a burden. She no longer felt like a forgotten woman, waiting for calls that wouldn't come. She was Helen Carter, survivor, matriarch, builder of her own damn story. And as the sunset painted Hazel's corner in shades of orange and honey, Helen knew one thing with clarity. Her story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Like no matter how much you gave, it was never enough. If you've been overlooked, silenced, or taken for granted, know this. You don't need anyone's permission to choose yourself. You're allowed to walk away from what hurts. You're allowed to start over even if it scares people. You're allowed to protect your peace. If this story reminded you of your own, share it in the comments. If you've ever had to stand up for yourself, leave a like. And if you want to hear more stories that speak the truth, subscribe, because your story matters, and it's time the world heard it.